Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are traveling back, way back to 1800, a really tense time in America, right at the very beginning of the whole experiment.
That's right. And we're looking at a text that honestly tried to completely reframe the whole argument about free speech.
Yeah, suggesting liberty isn't some kind of, gift from the government.
Exactly. Not a privilege, but a natural right. More than that, actually, a moral duty for every single citizen.
And the text is Tunis Wortman's treatise concerning political inquiry and the liberty of the press.
He was counsel at law in New York?
Yep. And this piece is just, it's one of the earliest and I'd say one of the most forceful Republican defenses of the press we have. He wasn't just arguing a legal point. He was pushing a moral imperative, a fundamental obligation.
And the context here is, is everything. He wasn't just sitting in an ivory tower thinking about this. He tells us right in the introduction, this big, dense book was written in less than 4 months amidst the constant interruption of business. Think about that. 4 months. That's incredibly fast for something this substantial.
It really speaks to the urgency he must have felt. The early republic is trying to figure itself out, and he's dropping this intellectual bombshell.
Absolutely. It feels like a direct challenge to the powers that be right then and there. His mission seems crystal clear.
Which is?
To prove beyond doubt that the freedom to investigate things, to reason about them, to speak openly, it's completely tied up with our moral duty to find the truth.
So you can't separate thinking from speaking or thinking from morality.
Not in his view. And the press. Well, the press is the vehicle for all of this. He famously calls it the guardian of every other right.
Not just a guardian, the guardian.
The linchpin. He's basically saying the right to inquire and to share what you find comes before the convenience of the state. It's foundational.
Okay, let's really dig into that because it's a revolutionary idea. It just melts away lines that, other thinkers try hard to keep distinct. We should start with his first big idea, political inquiry as moral law. This is in chapters 1 and V.
Right. So Wortman says, look, the theory of how you build a government, it's not some separate technical skill.
Like engineering or something.
Yeah, exactly. He insists it's actually a part of the bigger science of ethics.
Wow. Okay, in 1800, that must have sounded pretty radical. Because wasn't political science often treated differently, more like the art of power, Machiavelli and all that?
Precisely. Often seen as practical, maybe even cynical, how to gain and keep power, kind of separate from universal morality. Wortman just rejects that split completely.
How does he ground that?
He starts by saying all science, politics included, has to come from established principia, first principles, universal truths.
So government itself has to be built on a moral foundation. Politics is just ethics, but applied to everyone, to public life.
That's the core of it. And if you buy that premise, the next step is huge.
Which is?
If government is based on moral universals, then every single citizen is, and this is his word, bound, obligated to investigate the source of moral and social obligation.
It's not optional.
No. It's not just for the elites or the philosophers. It's a universal job tied to being a thinking, moral person. If you can figure out right from wrong in your own life, you have a duty to apply that same judgment to public affairs.
That really flips the script on who gets to participate.
Completely. And it lets him launch this immediate attack on the whole history of state secrecy. The idea that politics is too complicated, too sensitive for the average person.
Right. He uses that amazing language. The mysterious arcana of state affairs hidden away in the impenetrable recesses of the castle. It sounds almost medieval.
It perfectly captures that old monarchical view he's fighting. The belief that people can only be ruled by tricks, by stratagem and imposture. Because that ignorance was the engine of despotism for centuries. If people actually knew how things work, how flawed decisions often were, they wouldn't stand for it. So you needed mystery, fear.
He then asks this great question: why should government be the solitary exception among her sister sciences, the forbidden tree of knowledge?
It's pure Enlightenment thinking, isn't it? Faith in reason.
If we can study chemistry or physics, why not statecraft?
Exactly. To hide political workings is basically to claim that only delusion and error can keep order. Wortman says no, stable government has to be built on understanding, on people being persuaded by salutary consequences and the conviction of an enlightened understanding.
Knowledge, not ignorance, is the basis for consent.
That's it. Consent has to be informed.
Okay, so that moral foundation leads him directly to talking about where government power actually comes from. That's chapter 2. He makes a quick note that the whole jur divino thing, divine right of kings, is thankfully long gone.
Yeah, he sort of sweeps that off the table quickly.
So if authority isn't divine, then what is it?
It's derivative, strictly derivative. And this idea just dismantled centuries of political thinking.
Derivative meaning?
Government's power isn't original. It doesn't just exist in the rulers. It comes from somewhere else.
From the people.
Yes. Society is the source, the antecedent, and the sovereign. Government is just the creature, the instrument of society. A tool created only to promote the general happiness, the general felicity. Its power is delegated, loaned to it, essentially.
Okay, wait. Let me process that. The idea of government being responsible to the people. Wortman seems to take that a step further. Does he think accountability itself creates the right to investigate, even if the government doesn't say, okay, you can look?
That's exactly his point. He insists this idea of governmental responsibleness is universal. Even in, say, Turkey or Russia at the time, as he mentions, the people implicitly hold rulers accountable even if they can't enforce it. But he says that very idea of responsibility is an absurdity. It makes no sense, unless it implies a matching right to investigate.
You can't hold me responsible for my actions if you're not allowed to see what I did.
Bingo. The second you accept accountability, you have to accept scrutiny. It's the prerequisite. You can't have one without the other.
And scrutiny is always needed because rulers aren't perfect. They're human, fallible.
Right, he's very pragmatic here. Rulers partake of human fallibility and imperfection. Ambition, he notes, is still the lust of princes. Power corrupts.
He even ties this fallibility to real historical disasters.
He does. He looks at huge problems like the civil wars between Sylla and Marius in Rome, or the Praetorian Guard literally selling the Roman Empire. And he says the root cause is ignorance and the imposture which it nourishes. These weren't just random bad events. They were structural failures. Failures caused by a lack of public information, allowing corruption and ambition to run wild.
And the only antidote?
The progress of information, openness, knowledge, transparency.
This leads him to what you called the tyrant's dilemma in chapter 3. It sounds like a trap.
It really is. He basically says the despot has only two options. Either you maintain a state of gloomy ignorance and barbarism,
keep everyone dumb and scared,
or you have to tolerate the most unbounded liberty of inquiry. There's no middle ground in the long run.
Why not? Why can't the tyrant just allow some knowledge? Science, maybe, but not politics.
Because, Wortman argues, knowledge inevitably spills over. If you let people learn about science, nature, the laws of percipient causation, basically, how thinking works, cause and effect, that critical thinking won't stay in its box.
It'll leak into politics.
Inevitably. Intellectual power, he says, is incessant and indefatigable. Once you encourage people to think critically, they can't just switch it off when they look at their rulers. And that critical lens will eventually destroy despotism, because the flimsy artifices hiding the state's crimes won't hold up under scrutiny.
So knowledge itself is inherently liberating, inherently anti-despotic.
In his view, absolutely. Which sets up another big hurdle he has to clear.
Which is an argument we still hear all the time, right? Are ordinary people even competent to judge complex political issues? Don't you need experts, the administrative class?
Exactly. The classic objection. Government is complicated, the common folk won't understand. He tackles this directly in chapters 4 and V.
How does he break that down?
He says the objection confuses two different kinds of mental ability. Genius versus judgment.
Okay, what's the distinction for him?
Genius is that rare, almost divine spark, the power to invent something totally new, execute complex plans, create sublime art or poetry. Think Newton, he says.
Right. Uncommon ability.
Very uncommon. But politics, Wortman argues, doesn't actually require genius. It requires judgment.
And judgment is?
Judgment is the much more common power of comparing things, reflecting on them, weighing evidence, and making a decision. It's the basic ability to reason and discern.
And he thinks that ability is widespread.
Yes. He believes this power of judgment, combined with the basic moral sense he thinks all humans possess, is perfectly sufficient for political inquiry. Why? Because the evidence of truth, he says, can be presented equal to everyone's percipient powers. The basic facts, the moral core of an issue, can be understood by all.
Okay, but isn't that a bit optimistic, especially for 1800, with huge variations in education and literacy? Is he just saying educated people can judge, or does he really mean the common farmer?
That's a fair question. He addresses it by focusing on opportunity, not innate capacity. He uses that famous comparison, Sir Isaac Newton versus the common husbandman, the farmer.
Right, the genius versus the laborer.
He says the huge difference in their apparent talents is mostly down to education, opportunity, and habit. Circumstance, basically.
And then he poses that provocative question.
If Newton had swapped places at birth with the rustic, who will venture to pronounce that the latter might not have become his equal?
Wow. So potential is everywhere. It just needs nurturing.
Exactly. He's arguing talent isn't locked into social classes. It's stifled or cultivated by the environment. It's a really powerful implicit argument for universal education being essential for a healthy republic.
It also completely undermines the idea that just because someone gets into high office, they suddenly become wiser.
Oh, completely. He mocks the idea of some magical energy descending upon administrators. Wisdom isn't a perk of the job description.
In fact, he says the opposite might be true.
He asserts there are probably many thousands out in the community who are actually superior in discernment and erudition to the people running the show.
A defense of the citizen against the bureaucrat?
Absolutely. And he paints this really poignant picture of wasted potential. The choicest germs of intellect often just withering away unnoticed in humble circumstances.
It's a direct hit on the whole aristocratic idea that power and wisdom naturally go together. He's saying, no, you're probably ignoring your best minds by keeping power concentrated.
And this all ties into his argument in Chapter 7 about policy versus justice. This is another classic objection. Sure, justice is nice, but in the real world of government, hard-nosed policy has to rule. Amoral choices are sometimes necessary, things the public wouldn't understand.
How does Wortman handle that? He defines the terms first, right?
Yeah. Policy, he says, is about attachment to self, meaning our own good or the good of our specific community. Justice is broader. It's about universal benevolence, the good of all mankind.
So self-interest versus universal good seems like a conflict.
But he concludes they actually align. He believes the moral system is wisely set up so that general good and individual interest ultimately go hand in hand. Therefore, true justice and genuinely sound policy, even if their starting motives differ, will end up recommending the same course of action if you think it through properly.
So realpolitik that violates basic ethics isn't actually smart policy in the long run.
Exactly. He argues it can never be sound policy to inflict widespread injury or injustice because that will inevitably create instability and backlash. True, lasting policy has to be ethically sound.
Which means the common person's everyday moral compass, their sense of basic fairness,
is perfectly adequate for judging public policy because good policy is just enlightened self-interest that aligns with the universal good. It removes that final excuse for saying only the elites, the supposed masters of policy, can make political decisions.
If you can tell right from wrong with your neighbor, you can tell right from wrong for the state.
That's the bedrock of popular sovereignty he's building.
Okay, so the common citizen has the right, the duty, and the competence to investigate. But investigation isn't enough, is it? How do they share what they find? How do they make their judgment count?
Right. That brings us squarely to Section 3. The press, communication, and the whole idea of reform. Knowing something is useless if you can't tell anyone.
So in Chapter X, he links investigation directly to communication.
He argues they're two sides of the same coin. The right to investigate naturally implies the right to communicate the findings. He puts it rhetorically. If I'm allowed to read a book and learn something, why should I be stopped from publishing my thoughts just because they happen to touch on the actions of a magistrate, like Pericles in ancient Athens?
It seems absurd when you put it like that.
It does. And he sees publication itself as a crucial part of the truth-finding process.
How so?
He says, look, if my opinions are true, letting them circulate will obviously be beneficial. But crucially, if they are false, publishing them is the fastest way to get them corrected.
Because someone else will read it and refute it.
Exactly. Open debate exposes error. Silence allows it to fester. The only way to ensure mistakes remain uncorrected is to prevent discussion.
So trying to stop the flow of ideas.
He calls it the most horrible and pernicious tyranny. It's worse than just silencing critics. It actually severs the connections between citizens. It destroys that vital pleasure of unrestrained conversation, turning people into isolated, suspicious individuals. It kills the social fabric.
That's a powerful image. Society needs that free flow of thought to even be a society.
Absolutely. And when he gets to the printing press itself in Chapter 16, he has specific reasons for preferring it over, say, public speaking or oratory.
Why did he favor print?
He felt oratory often plays too much on emotions. It's fast, uses impassioned manner and intemperate gesture, and tries to sway the passions immediately.
Think of a fiery speech whipping up a crowd.
Right. Print, on the other hand, is slower. It allows reason to work. It gives the reader leisure to meditate, to reflect on the argument. And since Wortman believes political judgment requires calm reflection, not just passion, print is the superior medium for finding truth.
Which makes the invention of printing itself a world-changing event for him.
Hugely important. Before printing, knowledge was easily hoarded by elites, slowing down progress. He sees printing as this incredible engine for improvement.
He calls it a sacred pledge for the progressive improvement of the human race.
And an eternal barrier against the rude attacks of future Goths and Vandals. He literally sees widespread information as the defense mechanism against societal collapse and barbarism.
That's a pretty high stake for the printing press.
It is. But maybe his most practical, down-to-earth argument for why we need a free press is its function as a preventative measure, preventing violence, preventing revolution. He argues that freedom of investigation is the most effective way to stop violent upheaval.
That sounds counterintuitive. Don't governments usually worry that too much freedom will cause revolution?
That's the common fear. But Wortman flips it. He's seen history. He knows violent revolutions rarely end well. They spring from passion, not calm reflection, cause tremendous calamities, and often just replace one tyrant with another. Why? Because force isn't guided by moral reason.
So the path to avoiding violent revolution
is to address the underlying problems before they explode. You need to guard against the abuses that make people desperate. And crucially, if the government shuts down the channels for peaceful complaint, if it prohibits mutual intercourse and communication of opinion.
The safety valve.
Right. If you block that valve, then revolution might become the only option left, the only expedient.
So free speech isn't the spark for revolution, it's the fire extinguisher.
That's a great way to put it. Peaceful, philosophical reformation, using arguments in the press, should be cherished. It's the alternative to bloodshed. His whole treatise feels like an urgent plea. Use reason, use communication, or risk that suppressed anger blowing up like a convulsive fury of a volcano.
That volcanic imagery is potent. Okay, let's shift to section 4, where he directly confronts the ways governments try to shut down that communication, the fatal flaws of censorship. What was the standard method back then for dealing with a licentious press?
The main tool was criminal coercion. Arresting editors, imposing fines, using the power of the state to punish speech it didn't like.
And Wortman thought this was fundamentally wrong.
Fundamentally flawed, yes, because coercion doesn't teach anyone anything. Force might punish, but as he says, it never can be rendered the instructor of mankind.
You can't beat ideas into people.
No. Using force is injudicious. It breeds distrust between the people and the government, and it's far too easily turned into an engine of oppression rather than a tool for virtue. It silences, maybe, but it doesn't correct errors or improve public understanding.
So, if force is the wrong tool, what's his solution for dealing with lies or harmful falsehoods in the press?
He puts his face squarely in the open marketplace of ideas. Falsehood, he says, has to be fought with the extensive dissemination of truth.
Let truth battle error head on.
Exactly. He has this deep conviction that truth is inherently more powerful and captivating than error if it gets a fair hearing. Trying to suppress error often just makes it seem more important, more dangerous than it really is. Let it out in the open and refute it.
And critically, who gets to decide what's true or false? It can't be the government itself, right? Especially if the government is the one being criticized.
Absolutely not. That's the core conflict of interest. The only safe and wholesome guardian of public liberty, Wortman argues, is the censorial jurisdiction of society, basically, public opinion operating independently of the state.
The court of public opinion, not a government court.
Right. Giving the government, the magistrate, the power to restrict opinions would be, in his words, to trust the progress of information to the discretion of an interested authority.
The fox guarding the hen house, indeed. Especially when the hens are clucking about the fox's behavior.
Precisely. And we absolutely have to pause here and talk about that notorious legal doctrine he attacks head on. The greater the truth, the greater the libel.
This sounds completely backwards. How did that work?
Under English common law, which influenced American law, the main justification for punishing libel wasn't necessarily that the statement was false, but that publishing it, true or false, might disturb the peace.
So if you published something true about a corrupt official and people got angry,
that anger, that disturbance was the crime. And since a damaging truth is more likely to cause a disturbance than a weak lie, the truthful statement could actually lead to a harsher penalty for the publisher.
That's insane. It literally protects corruption by punishing those who expose it.
Wortman saw it as fundamentally unjust and destructive. To maintain that doctrine, he argued, was to declare open war against political inquiry itself. It destroyed the whole concept of holding magistrates responsible.
Because you couldn't publish the very facts needed to hold them responsible if those facts were inflammatory.
Right. His conclusion: criminal prosecutions for libel are inherently dangerous. They are invariably liable to be exerted as an engine of power by those in charge against their critics.
So what's the alternative if someone genuinely is harmed by a published falsehood?
His solution is clean and quite radical for the time. Get rid of criminal libel laws altogether, at least for political speech.
Just abolish them.
Yes, he argues that private civil lawsuits are perfectly sufficient. If an individual, whether a public official or a private citizen, is truly defamed by a lie that damages their reputation or livelihood, let them sue the publisher for monetary damages in civil court.
Like any other personal injury case.
Exactly. But the state, with its power to imprison and fine, should not be involved in policing political criticism. That keeps the government's coercive power out of the realm of opinion.
Okay, so he's laid out the moral case, the practical case, dealt with objections. Now, in Chapter 53, he brings it all home to the specific legal battleground of his day, the U.S. Constitution. And this wasn't abstract theorizing, was it? He was aiming directly at a specific law.
Oh, absolutely. The elephant in the room was the Sedition Act of 1798.
Passed by the Federalists.
Right. And it essentially criminalized making false or malicious statements critical of the federal government, the president, or Congress. Wortman's treatise is, in large part, a detailed constitutional argument, demolishing the claim that Congress even had the power to pass such a law.
How does he start that constitutional argument?
He goes back to basics. The Constitution, he says, is a compact of union. It's a document that primarily defines and limits the powers of the government.
Limited government.
Limited enumerated powers. He points out that the very word federal comes from fidus, meaning league or compact. This implies, and the 10th Amendment confirms, that any powers not specifically given to the federal government are kept by the states or the people themselves.
So the default is the federal government can't do it unless the Constitution explicitly says it can.
That's his framework. And applying that, he argues forcefully that the power to control political opinions or punish alleged libels is completely foreign and irrelative to the actual powers listed for Congress in Article 1, Section 8, things like coining money, raising armies, establishing post offices.
Where in that list does it say regulate political debate?
It doesn't. It's nowhere to be found.
But what about the Federalists' main argument? The idea of implied powers, the necessary and proper clause.
Ah, yes, the elastic clause. Wortman tackles that head on. He says that clause only applies to carrying out the enumerated powers already listed just before it. It lets Congress choose the means to achieve listed ends.
But it doesn't let them invent entirely new ends, like policing the press.
Exactly. He argues it cannot be stretched to create new substantive powers out of thin air. If Congress could use necessary and proper to claim jurisdiction over the press simply because they thought it was expedient, well, what couldn't they claim power over? It would blow the lid off limited government.
So that brings us to the First Amendment itself. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. How does Wortman interpret that?
He makes a crucial point. The amendment is purely negative. It's a prohibition. It doesn't grant Congress any power. It denies it a power.
So it's not saying, okay, Congress, you have this power, but here are the limits.
No. He argues the amendment clarifies that Congress never had that power to begin with. To even suggest that Congress did have the power to control the press before the First Amendment was ratified would mean, he says, that the original Constitution, without that amendment, was actually an odious and deprecable tyranny.
That's a brilliant piece of legal jujitsu. He turns the First Amendment from just a shield into evidence of the Constitution's original limited intent regarding federal power over speech.
It really is. It reframes the whole debate. It's an indictment of anyone trying to find broad, unwritten federal authority over basic rights. And this leads to his final stark warning about the danger of constructive power powers that are implied or interpreted into existence, not explicitly stated.
Because resting government authority on just vague opinion or perceived necessity
Opens the floodgates. Congress could then claim almost arbitrary prerogatives whenever they felt it was useful or expedient.
And this is where he brings in that quote from Junius.
Yes, the famous warning, never let even a small invasion of the Constitution slide, because one precedent creates another. What yesterday was fact, today is doctrine.
The slippery slope. What seems like a minor practical exception today becomes the established rule tomorrow.
Exactly. Wortman demands constant vigilance. The moment you allow a precedent where Congress can regulate political inquiry based on expediency, the whole structure of limited delegated power starts to crumble.
So this whole treatise, it's so much more than just a defense of free speech law.
Oh, far more. It's a declaration that a free, inquiring press is the absolute lifeblood of a republic. It's the essential tool citizens use to watch over power, to hold it accountable, to preserve their own self-government. For Wortman, silencing inquiry isn't just censorship. It's severing the connection between the people and their own sovereignty.
His core message seems to be that liberty isn't found in quiet agreement or forced unity.
No, it thrives in the messy, sometimes loud, unrestrained flow of truth and argument, driven by every citizen's moral duty to ask questions.
And he ends with a call to action, doesn't he?
He does. In the later chapters, 78th especially, he reiterates that cultivating our talents, seeking knowledge, and communicating that knowledge are vital duties. We can't make progress as a society if we aren't allowed to think about and discuss everything. He calls the effort itself noble and promising, even if perfect wisdom is elusive.
Okay, let's try to wrap this up by bringing Wortman's anxieties into our own time. He believed a republic's health could be judged by how bravely it tolerated challenging voices, even disruptive ones.
Right. And given his stark warning that if you block peaceful, mutual intercourse and communication, violence might become the only outlet we really have to think about that today.
Because while we don't often see direct government censorship or criminal libel prosecutions for political speech in the same way,
we do see other forms of silencing, don't we? Digital platforms removing content, online mobs demanding people be fired or deplatformed, the way echo chambers prevent people from even hearing opposed views.
Is this the modern equivalent of shutting down that mutual intercourse he warned about? Is the digital cancellation or suppression of voices today achieving the same result as the old Sedition Act stopping the flow of challenging ideas?
It's a deeply uncomfortable question. If Wortman saw suppressed dissent festering until it erupted like a volcano, what does our current climate, where tolerance for truly opposing views seems increasingly thin, and silencing mechanisms are incredibly efficient, suggest about our own social stability?
If the free exchange of ideas, even uncomfortable or intemperate ones, is the safety valve, are we closing it off? Wortman's challenge echoes. Is the responsibility still on us, the citizens, to keep that valve open through our own moral diligence, even when it's difficult?
It seems his answer would be a resounding yes. The choice remains the same: engage through reason and open debate, or risk the consequences of suppression. Wortman put his faith in reason.
Well, that's about all the time we have. You've been listening to The Deep Dive from Wake Up and Smell the Freedom, where ideas percolate. Thanks for joining us as we continue to explore the ideas that shape liberty and continue to shape us today. Remember, the pursuit of liberty begins with understanding, and understanding begins with asking the right questions. Until next time.
Bye-bye.